Fantastic. Okay, so today we welcome on Nathaniel Pawlowski. Nathaniel, you're a member of a family that has really been devoted to helping people really in Calgary and speaking out against government overreach all across the world now. I mean, the videos have gone viral, you've done interviews that have gone viral, and so there's so much to talk about there. Before we delve into that, and how your family was thrust into that wild position. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your interest, where you are, where you're going to school? A little bit about yourself would be great.
Sure. So my name is Nathaniel Pawlowski. I was actually going to Mount Royal, but I actually just recently finished my degree in criminal justice, and now I'm pursuing law school. So I'm just applying here shortly and taking my LSAT. So I'm full into studying right now. So it's pretty busy for me, but yeah, that's what my career path is looking like at the moment. My family figured we needed an in-house lawyer, so that's uh that's what I've been pursuing.
So you stepped up to the plate. That's awesome.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
and my interests also pointed me in that direction. My skill set, so it just kind of all worked together perfectly.
What a perfect, I mean, unfortunate but perfect timing to be able to actually kind of really see how deeply, I would use the word butchered a little bit, our laws have actually been, and at least the implementation of our laws from the justice system. And what a wild experience to kind of get almost a pre-hands-on experience prior to even going into law school. I mean, that must be pretty rewarding in a strange sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I learned firsthand that our system screws over the wrong people. It's designed to keep bad people out of jail and to put good people in jail. And we've seen that more than ever over the last 2 years. But I had firsthand experience into that. So I really am going from a perspective where our justice system needs radical reform. And what better way to do that than to actually become a lawyer and pursue that.
Absolutely.
yeah, I think the pandemic has really kind of shown people what's wrong with sort of our institutions and things like that, and even given people a different career path, which has kind of been interesting. It's definitely shifted what I was doing. I was doing graphic design, and very interesting how that happens. But okay, so let's start off with telling us a little bit about your family's background in terms of, where were they originally? They came to Canada from Poland. There's a bit of a backstory there, if you wouldn't mind elaborating and telling us about that.
Sure. So my family's Polish. My parents both lived in Poland under communism. So the Soviets were right after the Second World War, the Soviets came in and decided we now control Poland. This is now part of the Soviet bloc. And that's what my grandparents lived under, the Soviet tyranny. And in '89, communism collapsed. So that's what my father witnessed firsthand. The solidarity movement, what peaceful workers did when they came together, when they realized finally, hey, there's 35 million of us and we're being ruled by 50,000 communists. There's a lot more of us than there is of them. So what they did is they peacefully took it to the streets and crippled the system by deciding to just not conform, not comply anymore. They decided not to work for the communists anymore. So that's what my parents witnessed. And unfortunately, when there's a totalitarian regime, when there's tyranny, it takes up to an entire generation to fix that mess. So even after the fall of communism, the effects of communism were still very much in place in Poland. There was corruption, bribery, abuse. The whole country was just decimated. So my parents were in a very difficult position where they were forced to leave. They had to escape that communist tyranny, even though it had just fallen. And they escaped on a boat to Greece, or sorry, on a boat to Turkey. And from Turkey, they escaped to Greece, where they lived for 5 years. That's where my parents met. And they were doing quite well, actually. They were doing well. They were well off in Greece. They started a business. They were, it was growing. They were thriving. But there was still extreme corruption, right? You had to bribe the police, you had to bribe politicians to get anything you wanted. It was all bribery. It was all based on corruption. So my family was sick of it, and they went to a bunch of embassies basically that were open to immigrants. And Canada said that if you come to our country, you will have freedom, you will be free from religious persecution, and you will have freedom of opportunity and all these rights and freedoms awarded to you. So my family packed up and moved here. So I was born in Canada, but that's sort of the history of my family. They have been running from communism, from tyranny, from totalitarian regimes, from corruption their entire lives.
Incredible, incredible. Well, gosh, we're so lucky to have you guys. I just had to interject with that really quick because it's amazing to have that, people who do remember and who do know what bad times are like and what bad systems are like, to have that fresh in their mind, to be able to bring it over to Canada and say, hey, something might be kind of strange here, something's going wrong. Now, I mean, with that being said, did you ever notice, growing up, did your family ever say anything about something odds might be going on here in Canada that's a little bit reminiscent of the communist experience in Poland? I mean, we certainly saw these health measures come in that, in the past 2 years, had nothing to do with health, but more about government control. But prior to that, did you happen to notice anything strange? Did this come out of the blue for you, or was this something you were more or less expecting to occur?
Well, that's actually exactly right. My parents, and anyone who escaped a communist or any type of dictatorial totalitarian regime, they're the experts. Okay, I think we should look to them on what communism, what socialism, what fascism is, because they lived through it, right? I'd rather listen to someone who actually lived through it than some professor who's saying, well, socialism works on paper, communism works on paper. Well, it doesn't work in real life. Okay, and we have many examples throughout history where it doesn't work. So my family, and that's actually part of the reason maybe why they're so persecuted, is because they're a credible source of really telling people why communism is hell, right? My father explains that his childhood was hell on earth growing up under Soviet communism. So growing up here, my parents saw the signs of tyranny long ago. My dad was arrested for the first time in 2006 for reading the Bible in a park. He was reading the Bible in a public park without any amplification, without anything. He was reading the Bible in a public park, and he was arrested for it because the police officer said and the politicians said that the Bible is offensive and you're not allowed to read it publicly.
And I recall you in an interview saying, I believe this is the first time ever in Canadian history that a pastor was arrested for reading the Bible in public. And so I did some research because I thought that's probably true. It's so outrageous, it's so obscene, and I couldn't find any other instance. So I mean, an incredible shock, right? That even occurred. And this was in 2006, you said, so?
Yes, 2006. So I was 6 years old at the time, and you grow up and you have these sort of thoughts about police, about the legal system, about politicians. We're supposed to honor them, revere them, and respect them. But when you see a police officer abusing the law, lying on the stand, so if we didn't have cameras that actually captured the incident, the police officer was lying on the stand. So my dad could have faced 10 years in prison because a police officer lied on the stand, but we had it all recorded. Which is why it's so important to always have everything recorded, because people lie. This police officer lied on the stand and the judge said, listen, like we have video evidence. What are you talking about here? So the corruption at the highest levels. And since that point, my dad was arrested 10 times. From 2006 to 2015, he was arrested 10 times, all for reading the Bible, for feeding the poor, because in the city of Calgary, a bylaw passed that says you're not allowed to give free goods and services. So if I give you a pamphlet, that's giving a good away. If I give you a sandwich, if I give a dying homeless man a sandwich, that's illegal because I'm giving you a good. If I read the Bible for you, that's giving a service, that's illegal. So 10 times he was arrested, all for reading the poor, or for reading the Bible, feeding the poor, and giving church sermons on the streets, right? So this
real
the
criminals
sign
to arrest.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there aren't drug dealers and murderers and rapists to take off the streets. Instead, they're going after a pastor who is feeding the poor. But if we, my dad has a saying, follow the money. If you follow the money, you know why they do what they do. And same thing with this COVID stuff. If you follow the money, you understand why they do what they do. And what they did was the politicians, we found out later in hindsight that the politicians were made to look very bad. Because we were taking so many, my family was taking so many people off of the streets, giving them, housing, food, hope, and they were getting jobs and getting off the street, he was doing a better job than the politicians dealing with homelessness, which embarrassed the municipal politicians, and it also exposed that there's a problem. So in the early 2000s, there was a trend where we're going to end homelessness. Every politician was saying that we're going to end homelessness, and of course it was a failure. But when my dad was exposing the lineups, the amount of people that would come out for food, for help, for clothing, for housing, it made them look bad. So they had to remove him from the equation, and they did that by finding any little bylaw to throw at him and inventing bylaws, even, right? Giving illegal goods and services was invented for that purpose, to put my dad in jail. So the signs were very, very long ago, long before COVID. If you know any history, you understand that they have to remove the most vocal opposition, and that's what they were doing over the last 2 years, right? My dad was vocally opposing what the government is leading us into, and they had to shut him down. So that's why all the arrests, all the tickets. Recently, he was in court for $100,000 ticket for feeding the poor during Christmas lockdown. So they're not stopping.
And it's almost an indicator that you could at least maybe say, maybe correct me if I'm wrong in this, but that by just being a really integrity-driven person, being honest, trying to do the right thing, you would have faced challenges from our political system, from Canada, municipal, provincial, federal, just in the sense that you were trying to do something really honest prior to COVID, right? Like that, this just seemed like a person who's not listening to the government in their, made up laws or whatever's going on, and just trying to do the right thing, right?
And for the most part, they were actually, when my dad first started, so he quit the business. He was a businessman in Canada. He owned developing companies, contracting companies, a magazine. He was a businessman. He worked in Bankers Hall downtown. He was doing well off. And when he quit everything, sold everything, and decided to devote his entire life to feeding the poor and ministering and doing that work, the media actually was very positive at first. So the media was saying, local businessman devotes life to feeding homeless, taking people off the street. So the media was all on board until he started to challenge the narrative, until he started to go against what the politicians wanted. And then suddenly they flipped just like that. And they said, radical, crazy, fringe, all the names. I mean, they really, all they've done, the media and the politicians and the left, I'm going to say the left, is they've weaponized name calling. That's all they have on us. They've weaponized name calling. That's all they have. So if you take that away, they have nothing on you. They have nothing on us, right? This whole movement of students against vaccine mandates, against mandates in general, all they have is to label us misogynists, racist, white supremacists,
don't believe in science.
Fringe minority, right? That's all they have, is weaponizing names. So if you take that away, so the way I see it is you have two options. You can either accept it, right? Accept the names and say, so what? So what? And then you take away that power. I mean, obviously admitting that, or buying into that they're calling us, transphobes and white supremacists. You don't want to do that. But if you take away that power, or the second option is to flip it on them. So you say they're calling us neo-Nazis. No, you're actually the fascist, right? We don't want large government. We don't want all this stuff. You want it. You want the big government. You want the communist agenda. We don't want that stuff. So you can flip it on them, but all they have is name calling. So that's what the media did to my dad, is they weaponized name calling. And if you Wikipedia search his name, there's going to be a million different names that they call him, but none of it is true. All of it is a lie. But
yeah, that's the thing. What I noticed, a lot of the names that they call people don't really make any sense. And then you even ask them to explain, okay, how is this person a fascist, or how is this person a Nazi? And they don't even have an answer to it. Like, really explain the parallel. I also find it interesting that they say we're not allowed to suggest that there are parallels between what's happening now and what happened in Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia or anything like that. But then they can call us Nazis, which they're making those parallels. But
no, there's an insane double standard. But what my dad did is he flipped it on them. So they were calling us the fascists, the Nazis. He's like, no. You're the one who are Nazis. You're the ones who are using Nazi tactics. My grandparents talked about this. My parents knew about this, right? You're the one who wants censorship. You're the one who wants big government. You're the one who wants, state-sponsored, state-controlled media. straight out of Joseph Goebbels' playbook. Like, you're the ones who are pushing for all of this. We don't want any of that. We're not the fascists. You're the fascists. You're acting like fascists. So that's what my dad did, and that's where the viral video came out of, where he chased the police officers out of his church because they were actually breaking 4 laws. So 3 criminal code sections and trespassing, because they didn't have a warrant. So they came in to shut down church service because Alberta Health Services decided to do that when they have no jurisdiction. They have no authority. I mean, they're not elected officials. We don't elect these health services, and yet they have more power than the politicians. So my dad, took a stand and kicked them out.
And that's what was so awesome part about the video. And I had to actually add that in our notes because I highlighted it, Gestapo, because when he said that in the video, it was so true. And that I think a lot of people up to that point, maybe I'm wrong in my recollection of it, is that we hadn't been direct enough in saying, actually, it's really quite true. They are acting like, in many ways, fascists. This is undeniable. And so to hear someone with such passion and vigor say it so clearly, hey, you guys are really
and the
acting.
accent.
Yeah.
And the accent. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, what does Gestapo mean? Right. I think that verbiage rubs Canadians in the wrong way a lot of the time. And we got so much, criticism for that we use the words Nazis, Gestapo, but people don't know history. They don't understand, how the brown shirts standed up. What was the Gestapo? The Gestapo was political police force. They didn't work for the people. They worked for the government. That's what we have now. The RCMP, the police services are acting as agents of the government. They're acting like Gestapo, right? Nazi, that can be attributed to, I'm just following orders. No, that doesn't cut it. You can't just be following orders. You have a conscience. You have, act on your convictions. Say no. One guard who was, he said, well, there was mistreatment when my dad was in prison for 51 days. One of the guards came to him and said, well, what would you have me do? My dad said, resign, quit your job. If you're being told to treat human beings like this, to push drugs on inmates, to do all this torture, essentially. They were locked in solitary confinement. Anything in solitary confinement, anything above 14 days is considered torture. So they were torturing inmates. One guy was in solitary for 2 years. My dad met him. Yeah. So
Oh my God.
You have to quit. Like, quit your job. What is your soul worth? $40,000-$50,000 a year? Is it
You're not doing what you signed up to do.
Exactly. You're not following your oaths. So these people need to understand that the verbiage we use might be actually not harsh enough. What do you call a person that's pushing a government agenda that's designed to hurt people? That we know now, right? I'm not going to go into the whole science behind it. That's not my background. Tomorrow, my dad actually has a press conference with Dr. Peter McCulloch, Dr. Paul Alexander, and Dr. Roger Hodgkinson. So they're more well-versed on the topic, so I'm going to leave that up to them. But we know right now, when 15 pages of Pfizer adverse reaction comes out about this vaccine, and you have all this stuff, like, what do you call a person that's pushing an agenda that's so harmful on its own people? Canadians don't understand. Europeans more understand that their own government, your own government, can be against you. Like, Canadians don't understand that concept. Your own government can be out to hurt you. Yeah. That happens throughout European history. Yeah.
And we're so far removed from that history, right? Like, I was listening to Tucker Carlson, who's saying you still can see there's like bullet holes in some buildings, or you have people that, your family members who've lived through this and can tell stories, or you yourself or something. You're so much closer to that history, and we're just not. We're so removed from that. And yeah, people just think of it as being sort of an exaggeration to say you're acting like the Gestapo, or you're being a fascist, or whatever it is. To them, it almost feels like this exaggeration. But it's like, no, this is very real, and it can happen, and it can happen here. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean you can't. This can't happen. Yeah.
And
it's only been 75 years since that happened, right? We had several Holocaust survivors come to the rallies and to speak, and we did that deliberately. People don't understand why. Well, it's because if they're not allowed to make the parallels, who is?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. It's funny too, because people who have been through difficult times end up valuing things like freedom, right? And that really means something. It's not just a word tossed around. It really is something, freedom. And here it seems we value compliancy and comfort. really, first and foremost. And I think that's really what leads us to think that our government can never do anything like this. And let's just go along because they would never have any evil intentions. It's incredibly naive and unfortunate. So difficult to see. And it shows you really the reason why, at least with in regards to people who are committing such vicious acts in, positions such as an example of a prison guard, all the way to people who, school administrators who are pushing these vaccine mandates, and all the way up. Why it needs to be ensured that we actually see them go through court, right? This goes to a higher level than just kind of forgetting about it after 2 years. So there's a bit of urgency there and an importance. But just back to when your father had that viral video come out, what happened? I mean, immediately after, was there immediate shock within the, I mean, at least for kind of a kickback, I guess, from the community, or take us through that a little bit, because it came out, and of course, from everyone who always sees the viral video, you just see the video, and then of course the arrest followed. But what happened there? What did your family have to go through, and what kind of repercussions came almost immediately after, I'd assume?
Well, when it immediately happened, I thought nothing of it because my family has experienced so much corruption, so much misuse of the law. All this, all these infringements of our rights and freedoms, and all this, all these charges, nonsense, all this stuff piled up. We experienced this for a long time. So my dad has been very vocal for a very long time. So he's made videos like that many times where the police come to harass him, to enforce bylaws that are completely unconstitutional, that are, they're just flipping their black little book, trying to find anything just to pin him with. So when he did that video, I thought absolutely nothing of it. He posted it on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and that's it. We went on with the rest of our day. And then I looked at it a few hours later. I was like, whoa, that's a lot of views. Like, that's like 50,000 views, 100,000 views, 200,000 views. Like, that's a lot. And then, TMZ picked it up, and then, Fox News picked it up, and then, it's going everywhere like wildfire. And, I thought about why it went viral, and we came up with the conclusion that it was just the perfect timing. It was like a point where the day before, actually, a pastor in the UK, his church was shut down, and he let the police into his church, and he said, well, sorry, congregation, the police are here. We're going to have to shut it down. We can't do this anymore. Parallel that to my dad's response is very different. So it's like everyone at that moment in time was thinking what he said, and then he did it. He was just doing what everyone else was thinking. Like, this is enough. They can't come after churches. They can't come after our small businesses or restaurants. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's hypocrisy, and we see it. Marijuana stores and liquor stores and abortion clinics and Walmart and Costco, they can be open, but churches have to be shut down. But the small, mom and pop's store has to be shut down. So it was just that moment where my dad kind of showed people, this is how you should respond to when people are blatantly ignoring our Constitution. When authorities and police and health services are just ignoring the rule of law, this is how you respond. So obviously there were repercussions for doing that. When you oppose a tyrannical government, you're going to have repercussions. And a week or two later, he was arrested on the highway because the city of the province of Alberta actually put in a court order that prohibits anyone from breaking the Health Services, Act or whatever. And it made every single Albertan liable to imprisonment if you broke any health service violation. So he was arrested for that, and obviously the mainstream media in Canada were like, "This guy's crazy," and misogynist, white supremacist. It's like, what does that have? What? Like, no, what does that have to do with anything? Yeah, it doesn't. It's like, where are those accusations coming from? It was, completely irrelevant and lies, of course. But those were the repercussions that my family faced, and
it's quite shocking too. Incredible story. It's so nice to have that background to see that you guys really are used to this. You've suffered through this before, like you said. It's exposing the government, exposing hypocrisy, and that just leads you to to have to face these incredible, unbelievable challenges. But it's amazing too that there were so many people, so many government of Alberta officials who broke the travel they broke the mandates that their own government had placed and imposed on the people, on the citizens. And so then therefore a pastor gets arrested. And now you have to correct me, was this the arrest? There's been quite a few arrests, but was this the arrest where it was the incredible highway stoppage?
Yes.
That was it. Lee,
Yeah.
have you seen that video?
I haven't, no.
It's unbelievable. It was just like, I think it was one of those moments in life where you almost remember where you are when you saw the video. Like, it's like, oh my God, what? And it's in Calgary on a major highway, a very known spot. And this incredible, almost like it was like, and I think your dad said it well one time, like an El Chapo style arrest. Like it was like of a large, drug dealer. Shocking. So it's incredible in the sense of, and it's a huge question to ask following one, but can you take us through then after this, the arrest that came along with, I mean, we've what now, your father's been arrested 6 times, but can you, it's a huge thing to remember, but can you take us through that, those arrests possibly?
Yeah. So before COVID, he was arrested 10 times. And then since COVID, he was arrested 6 times. So 16 total. But the first one was the highway arrest. So that was quite dramatic. It didn't make sense. It was the armed uniformed guards of the police. I forget what they're called exactly, but it's basically the SWAT team of the Calgary police. Put many cruisers just to take down a pastor who was just coming back from delivering his church service, right? It was completely ridiculous and my dad's never been a flight risk. He's never resisted arrest. He's never doing any of this stuff. If they had just called our lawyer and said, there's an arrest warrant, please turn yourself in, my dad would have done that. But no, they had to make this dramatic arrest. And you know what? In hindsight, it served us because, again, all of this is exposing. And that's the beauty of COVID. Obviously, terrible things have been done. People have died, horrible things. But one of the positives is that it's exposing what is what, the truth. It's exposing them for who they really are. So it was terrible because him and my uncle was also arrested. Why my uncle? I don't understand. Just because he's my dad's brother. It made no sense why he was arrested too. He was just at the door that day, ushering people in. He wasn't actually performing a church service, keeping the church open, but it was a message. They sent a message to my dad that it's not just you, it's your family that's in danger now because of your vocal opposition to this regime. So they spent 3 days in prison illegally because they weren't processed. They were, the whole procedure was completely ignored. It was anyway. After that, my dad, he didn't really know what to do. He was like, what's my next step? And he felt that in prison, he received the word, and he needs to go to the US to spread the word. So he went on tour to the United States for 4 months. I went with him for half that time, and then I had to come back to study. But we did a tour going all around the United States. People in the US are very sympathetic to the story because they value religious freedoms. They value freedom of speech. They value this stuff a lot more than Canadians do. So they're very sympathetic and very open to that story. They love the story because it's also a warning to Americans. Like this is your future. You're one step behind us, and it's one short step. You're one bad day from tyranny, one bad vote in from tyranny. So my dad went around speaking, and the minute he gets back on Canadian soil, he steps foot on the airport, and they arrest him. They arrest him for an incident that had happened like 6 months before for, I think it was baptizing people or illegal gathering. That's what it was. But it was because he was, I believe, baptizing people. So they charged him criminally under the Health Service Act because of this contempt of court order that they made up and all this stuff that just, rule of law out the window. So after that,
all political, yeah,
exactly. After that, I forget it all kind of blends together. So I forget the exact order of it. But after that, we had a protest outside of the Minister of Health's house. And it was completely legal. It was on the sidewalk. We weren't blocking traffic. We weren't trespassing. No one was, crossing into people's personal property. It was just on the sidewalk outside of his home saying, stop these mandates. Stop it. Stop with these stuff. Stop doing this. Albertans have had enough. And for that, we were coming back from that protest, And again, him and my uncle were arrested on the highway in the snow, dragged through the snow, and they spent, I believe, a day, 24 hours, I think, in prison. And most of the arrests, they don't spend more than 3 days. It's usually 24 hours or 48 hours, or then 3 days. That's usually the max it goes. And then he was also arrested for a rally he did in Leduc, I believe, just outside Edmonton. And he was heading there. And then an RCMP officer ran his plate on the highway. And they're like, oh, well, there's a warrant out for your arrest out in Calgary. He's like, what for? And he's like, oh, because you participated in a rally. Like, really, like out of the 2,000 people that were there, he was singled out and arrested. But the RCMP officer actually that day was okay. He just took him to the car, said, sign this paper and you're immediately released. So that one was okay. When it came to treatment, it wasn't, El Chapo style, SWAT style in the middle of the highway. They just, they were respectful, did their job. Like, I'm okay with that. He wasn't called, that officer wasn't called a Nazi that day, because he actually did his job, was respectful, didn't drag people and all that. So, and then he was missing one arrest, but the biggest arrest was that of the Coutts blockade, the Coutts protest. My dad went down there because they were asking him, or he went down there actually just to do a church service. We went there because he wanted to do Lord's Prayer with them and Lord's Supper, do the communion with them and do a quick, sermon to these truckers, because they seemed in a very dark place at that moment. We didn't start the protests. It wasn't our thing. We weren't involved in it too much. But one day we decided we're going to go and show our support for this movement, because it's a beautiful movement that's happening in Alberta. It was a parallel.
Before we get into it, can you explain to people, just in case some people are unfamiliar, can you explain what the Coutts event was, that particular rally?
So at the same time, people were heading to Ottawa to do their trucker protest over there. Albertans decided we're going to do one here for our own provincial mandates, because federal mandates might be lifted because of the truckers, but we also have provincial mandates that need to go. So the farmers, the truckers, they all decided to go to the Montana Sweetgrass border, which is on Coutts is the Albertan side, and they basically blocked the entire highway with their trucks, their tractors, and their cars. And it went on for weeks. It was a week-long thing, but it wasn't meant to actually last that long. It was meant to, a couple days maybe, and then the Alberta government, Premier Jason Kenney, is going to be like, okay, these guys are serious. We don't want another Ottawa. Let's just rescind the mandates. But because this guy is so proudful and arrogant, he decided to send RCMP and put in blockades and this crazy. It was crazy when I went down there. We had to go through 3 police blockades just to get down to the town before Coutts, and then to get into Coutts was difficult. And it was a crazy experience. But when we got down there, my dad just did his thing as a pastor. We did communion with them. We did the Lord's Prayer, and then he did a 19-minute speech / sermon, just encouraging them, telling them, Albertans stand with you guys. You guys are doing the right thing. This is what I saw growing up, the solidarity movement that broke the neck of the Soviet hold on Eastern Europe. This is beautiful, the beautiful event. And he encouraged them. And he told them 3 times in this speech, do it peacefully. Do it as in the way that I saw growing up, a peaceful, non-compliance, civil disobedience movement, like Martin Luther King Jr., like Mahatma Gandhi, like Solidarity. And then nothing really happened. We went back home after that. And a few days later, we were going to go down a second time. And the police, the RCMP, along with the Calgary Police Service, were waiting outside of our home for who knows how long in an undercover minivan. And as soon as my dad stepped foot outside, they ran at him, sprinted at him, and said, "You're under arrest." And then they dragged him off to prison. But this time it was different. This time it felt different. It was like a vengeful anger. There was more politically motivated things involved in this arrest than in the other one.
Was there ever? Because the arrest was based on what they deemed to be his actions from the Coutts blockade speech, right? The inciting violence. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the media, And the Crown prosecutor claimed that he incited violence at this protest, when 3 times in that speech he says, I'm not talking about violence, I'm talking about peaceful resolution, I'm not talking about guns and swords. So he was condemning violence, he was condemning the use of guns.
And you can see the speech on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh
right?
yeah, it's published. It's 19 minutes on YouTube, on Facebook.
It's quite beautiful. Like, you don't have to be religious. It's just it's amazing. It really was. Everyone who was watching was so glad that your dad was there, because it was conveying the feelings of Albertans and Canadians, how we felt about, and congratulating them and thanking them for their actions. And like you said, it was actually a really beautiful speech. So anyways, I encourage people to watch.
We'll link to it below for those listening on Rumble or Spotify. It'll be linked below. But yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So he just did a speech, and what we've noticed over the last 2 years is speech is dangerous. It's dangerous to the regime. It's a danger to the politicians and to the lie. I mean, if you tell the truth, then the lie is vulnerable, right? The truth can stand on its own. Lies have to be supported by more lies and more disinformation, misinformation. But when you bring the truth, it's very dangerous. That's why they hate my dad, is because he's such a loud, vocal voice opposing all of this. So, but this arrest was different. We felt it was different. It's not going to be a short while. And he spent, in hindsight, it was 51 days, but in the moment, we didn't know how long it was going to be. It was his bail kept being denied. He was, the judge actually claimed he's a danger to the public and should not be released. That's what the judge said when she was denying him bail at the first bail hearing. So this is like, we're not just dealing with corrupt politicians. We have a corrupt system. We have corrupt judges. We have corrupt Crown prosecutors. We have, if the fish stinks from its head, then the whole fish is rotten, and our entire system is rotten. And we didn't know how long he was going to be in there. His bail kept being denied for insane reasons. Like, our lawyers were saying, this is unprecedented. This is ridiculous. This has never happened before. They have no reason to leave him in. He's never been convicted. He has no criminal record. He's not a flight risk. You don't just leave people like this in prison. While he was in prison, several people were actually released for way more, dangerous charges, for sexual assault, for assault with a deadly weapon. One guy was released for running over a police officer with his car intentionally, and he was released on bail. But this pastor who did a 19-minute speech was denied bail multiple times. So we didn't know how long he was going to be in there. But what I decided to do was, either I could mope around at home and say, oh, well, dad's in prison and this, world's awful and woe is me. Or I can just, decide to pick myself up and do something about it. So what I did is I decided to stage daily protests outside of the prison. So I'd be there every single day until he's released. And that's exactly what I did. I brought speakers, loud, giant speakers, blasting music at the prison, doing speeches, exposing all the corruption that was happening within. Because my dad would call us and say, listen, 4 different inmates came to me and they said, a guard offered me an incentive to beat you up. I'm not going to do it because you're a clergyman and because they became friends. My dad befriended everyone in his unit. He was spreading the gospel. He was like, everyone loved him.
He has that kind of personality. He's very
He does. Absolutely.
But four different inmates, and they're willing to testify about this, said that guards offered them incentives to beat him up. So that's the type of stuff we're dealing with within. Right? They confiscated his Bible. They wouldn't give him his reading glasses. They would ransack his room all the time, looking for contraband, as if this pastor has contraband in his room, and no one else was treated like this. He would be repeatedly strip searched. No one else was being treated like this. And different inmates would actually call us and they would testify about these things. We'd record these conversations because they're very valuable, and they could be valuable later in court, because what they did was illegal and against multiple human rights. So this is what we were dealing with. So I was out there outside of the prison every single day, spreading the word about what's happening in a Canadian prison, not North Korea, not China, not Soviet Russia, Canadian first world, quote unquote, prisons. So that's what I decided to do. And I was there every single day with a group ranging from 20 to 200 people, and just protesting, voicing our opposition. And we were all threatened with tickets, arrests, and towing of vehicles and all that stuff. But we never stopped. One day we had actually the truckers who were returning from Ottawa. They stopped at the prison. So there was like 250 people there that day, trucks blaring their horns. And my dad was telling us what was happening on the inside. Like, it paralyzed the prison. Guards were going crazy. They had to like go into full lockdown. They're like, what is happening? Like, they were losing their minds.
Like
so it was
these experiences,
it was
though,
great.
your family's experiences must have woken so many people up to what was going on. I mean, that just during the pandemic, the stuff that was happening, I would come home sometimes and go, is this real? I feel like I'm in a movie, because myself too, I never would have thought this stuff would have happened in Canada. And thank goodness I kind of came from a family where we really valued, learning and reading and talking about history. And, family trips would be going to historical sites and learning about these places. So I had an appreciation for it. But a lot of people and a lot of, younger Canadians, I feel like we weren't getting that in school. We weren't really learning about these historical events. It might be a very quick, brief topic on the Holocaust, and then it kind of goes over it. You don't really learn too much about communism and socialism and whatnot, but it's really these events that your family has gone through and your ability to share it on social media and YouTube and whatnot that I think has woken a lot of people up. What were the bail conditions for your father's release? What was that?
So when he finally was released after the 51st day, the bail conditions were very strict. He was, and by the way, the entire time was spent in solitary confinement, minus about 4 days. So 46 days. Yeah, so 46 days he was in solitary confinement. And then on that day, he was transferred to Edmonton because they were so sick of us protesting outside. I mean, we cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, because think about it. They had to hire more sheriffs, more guards. They had to pay them double time, overtime, because they were swarming us, right? Because they were worried. I don't know what would storm the place. Like, I don't know what they were thinking, what the rationale was, but they had to hire all these extra personnel, and we cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Your dad's probably proud.
They were finally sick of it. Yeah, so they exactly, and the guards inside were like, tell them to go away. They tell my dad, tell them to go away, and my dad's like, no, I'm here. they're like,
let me out,
no, tell them to go. Yeah, they said, go protest outside the courthouse, and he's like, why would they do that? I'm here. I'm being mistreated in here. I'm being tortured in here. Where else would they go? So we decided to stay and make our stand there, but they got pretty ticked off about it and shipped them off to Edmonton, and they placed them in the cell for the most dangerous criminals, the most violent offenders. It's called like it's kind of like the ice box. It's called Max Pod, where they put you basically on display for everyone. It's above, it's like an ice box. And that day where he got there, miraculously, the air conditioner was broken, so it was blasting in his cell for 24 hours. So he's like, if I came in here healthy, I'm not going to leave healthy, because I'm going to get sick in here. I mean, the conditions are filthy. This is all about health, right? And it's all filthy cells, cold environments, no blankets, like mistreatment. This is Canada, and they're treating people like inmates in China or North Korea. So his bail conditions were very strict when he was finally released. And by the way, he was also transferred from in Edmonton. He was transferred from that ice box to the psych ward against a medical. So there was no medical evaluation. It was against health service procedure. It was against prison procedure. And they transferred him to the psych ward and put him in a room with a roommate who was a schizophrenic who had killed his brother with a machete. So that, like, I'm not insinuating anything, but think about what the rationale was, because that order had to have come from the top. Yeah. What was the rationale behind that order? What do you think it was, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
You got to just look at it realistically, right? Like, this is what's happening. Yeah. That's insane. And how this would have affected, him, obviously, his mental health, but your whole family, and you guys don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know how long he's going to be in there. That must have been extremely difficult to
That was
go
the worst part. The worst part of it was not knowing, because his bail keeps being denied. Like, he could be in there until the trial. So that's a year in prison, experiencing this kind of treatment is the reality that we were facing. So that was the worst part of it. It was the not knowing when. And as you know, right now, truckers are still in prison. They're still in prison being denied bail, while murderers, rapists are being let off on bail. So it's completely, if you don't think it's politically motivated, you're completely blind. So yeah, when he was, back to the conditions, when he was released, he was given the condition, you're not allowed to participate in any protest or rally anywhere in Canada. You have a curfew, like a house arrest curfew, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. like a child. I don't know why. I mean, it's like, what is he, dangerous at nighttime? Like, just made no sense. But he was given this curfew. He was told to be of good behavior and keep the peace, and some other small conditions, but that was about it. The worst one was the house arrest. So he's still, to this day, he has a curfew. So he's being still punished for something he hasn't stood trial for. What happened to presumption of innocence? What happened to the very foundation of our justice system? No, it's now you're guilty until proven innocent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
When you're
whole
going against the narrative.
going against the narrative. Absolutely. The whole story is just, it just shone such a light to those who don't know, right? It's to those who've been through it, have understood this. But again, I think it comes from we if we're happy, if we're comfortable, we don't really care what happens to others, and the government can never do anything wrong. So it's a stark reminder. And a very tough one indeed. An important thing I think both of you had mentioned a few times is just the word family, right? Like how important that actually is, and to have that, strong, support for us, and to be supportive of one another. That seems like another thing that the government has really tried to dismantle over the past 2 years, and for longer. I mean,
the whole family structure is being attacked. And there's a reason for that. Family is the very foundation of any strong economy, of any strong democracy. It's family. It's always been based on the strong family unit. So when you see family being attacked with all these other different agendas and you name it, right, this woke culture, you have to take a minute and ask yourself why. Why are they attacking the family unit?
Absolutely. And there's been this concerted effort. I mean, this goes back to before the pandemic again, I'd be chatting with my family all the time saying, I'm seeing this concerted effort to break down the nuclear family, to, push women to being, single mothers, really like promoting it as if it's a good thing. Like, you don't need a man in your life, and men are toxic and men are bad, and to divide the genders. And I was just going, why is that happening? And since things have sort of all unfolded, now I see why, and it's making more sense. But it's a very scary thing to witness once you start to understand why they would be doing that. Should we switch on to your school experience?
I think that'd be cool. Yeah, we really want to dive into what your experience has been like in Mount Royal too. I just quick addition to the previous point Lee made there, is we saw it to the point destroying the family structure to the point where they were giving children COVID-19 injections with young children. Without consent, without the parent being there, not telling them, and even in some cases incentivizing the child to come get a shot. Don't need your parent. There's an ice cream truck here, whatever. And
especially with a culture that's so, and I think this is actually a good thing. Of course it is, but a culture that's so focused on consent, the notion of consent, right? It's kind of ingrained into this culture that you need consent for all these things, right? A minor can't consent when it comes to sexual activities, but when it comes to putting a vaccine in their body, or when it comes to changing their gender, right, they don't need consent then. Like, this is just the hypocrisy, and there's no logical consistency with them.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous hypocrisy, right? This is like scary hypocrisy when it's gone beyond the point of just willful negligence or ignorance. It's actually really quite criminal in many cases now. Sorry, Lev, I'm sure you decided we're going to ask about your university experience at Mount Royal. Could you take us through that? I mean,
Yeah.
was people know who you were? I mean, they must have known your family, who your dad was. What was the sentiment in universities like? Was it supportive of your family and the causes, or what did you find?
Well, in short, no. But um, in general, and I am a bit ashamed of this, to admittedly, for the first couple of years, I just wanted to keep my head down, get my degree, get my schooling, just, in and out, go to school, do my thing, and go home. But that's a wrong mentality to have now that I know the things that I know, because if you don't bring truth to the lie wins. So I had the wrong mentality about it, and I just wanted to keep my head down, be quiet, shut up and learn and do my thing. But then I came to a point where they weren't letting me just continue my schooling, the basic right to education. They weren't letting me do that thing. And they were teaching me nonsense at the university too. I mean, the things they teach now, I'm almost at the point where I'm advocating for homeschooling, because the things they teach is just, they ignore basic biology. They teach communism and socialism like it's a bright idea, a great thing, revolutionary, and that it's going to fix all our problems. All this stuff, the depravity I learned at university is just, it's sickening. But anyway, when I got to the point where they weren't letting me just live my life and get my education because of my vaccination status, because of my personal medical record, they crossed the line and they opened something inside of me that I think they'd learn to regret, because I am my father's son, and we're not going to be quiet and let them walk all over us. Right? We'll let the system win. So when the university announced that they were going to do the vaccine mandates, and that if you didn't get it, you're going to get kicked out, lose your education, I did everything in my power to, do everything by the book, get the exemption or whatever, but they were denying all the exemptions. Nope, your religious basis is not valid. My dad's a pastor, anyway, they weren't acknowledging any of this.
Anyone
So,
get a religious exemption?
Or that you just need an exemption at all. Sorry, that's my
no, it should any reason to get an exemption, you should be awarded an exemption. I mean, we have freedom of conscience, we have freedom of expression, we have freedom of opinion. You're allowed to say no to things, at least on paper. In reality, that's gone out the window. So when they said, your religious basis is not acknowledged, well, then I decided to stage, I believe, the first protest at an Albertan university. I'm not sure about Canada, but I was the first student, I believe, to protest in Alberta and stage a protest. And I was a bit disappointed with the numbers. About 60 people showed up, of which was like maybe 25 students. So it wasn't great on the numbers. But it was the first protest anyone had set up in Alberta, and everyone was scared because there were court orders in place and injunctions, and you didn't know if you were going to get arrested. So it was a scary thing, but overall it went well. We did our protest, and then we decided that's not the end of it. We're gonna win our freedom back. We're gonna win our right to education. So we were doing, petitions, posters, harassing the university, emails, phone calls, and then I realized none of this is working. They don't care about anything. And then you follow the money and you realize, oh, they receive insane amount of money from the Alberta government to push these vaccines and to mandate vaccines. So we realized what everything was about. So they don't care about anything. They just care about money. And finally, I got fed up and I decided to meet with I have to meet with you face to face. Who's doing this to me? Who is doing to? So I tried to meet with the president, the board of directors. Nobody would meet with me, right? I'm sure my last name has been. I'm sure that's and my last name, it didn't seem very hopeful. But finally, I got to meet with the person who is responsible for denying the religious exemptions, and I met with him for like 2 hours. We had a conversation about everything, and he was shaking. He was shaking in the interview. It was weird. He was very intimidated by my presence there. And he's sitting down and having an interview with him. And then I told him at the end of it, I basically threatened him. I threatened him legally. I said, if you don't stop discriminating against your students, if you don't start upholding my religious convictions, if you don't start respecting my human rights and my religious rights, as per the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, as per the Alberta Health Act, I'm going to sue you. And he said, yes, I welcome any legal action that you feel is necessary. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm going to sue you, not the university, you, because you're doing this to me. The university is not doing this to me. You're doing this to me. You're responsible for this. And he like completely changed. His face went from like, friendly and I welcome all legal action against the university to like mad raging fire. And he started to, yell at me. He's like, you can't, you're intimidating a faculty member, and you can't be doing this. This is out of, code of conduct and policy and all this stuff. And I said, no, I'm not threatening you. I'm not harassing you. I'm not, intimidating you. I'm just saying I am legally going to take action against you because I feel that my human rights are being violated. And he said, well, let's sit down and look at your exemption.
Oh my God. That is what an incredible story. Now, you have a background in criminal justice too. You must have just thought, I don't want to make any assumptions on the person, but I mean that this is somewhat indicative of a level of actual, from what I remember my brief in criminal time in criminal studies, was that sounds a little indicative of a criminal, at least of a white collar criminal, someone who under pressure all of a sudden becomes irate, right? They react in ways that are not reasonable for the circumstances. So, I mean, that must have just been really interesting to go through in person.
And especially since actually at that time I was taking a charter law class where I was learning about all these precedent cases about religious liberty and religious freedoms in Canada. So I was referencing all these cases. I was citing them and saying, you're breaking this precedent. You're going against this. And they don't care about that. They don't care about, but as soon as you make it personal, as soon as you say, I'm going after you in your wallet for discriminating against me, everything changes. The conversation completely changed then. I was awarded my religious exemption. I was the only one, to my knowledge, at Mount Royal University to be awarded a religious exemption. There were some people at UFC I heard of, but everyone at MRU was being denied. And then, I took my stand. And the funny thing is, I gave other people my template. I said, this is what I did. I met with the guy and I was awarded my exemption because I took a stand and I made it personal. But here's my template. So they used my template and they were still denied. Right. So it had to have been that meeting and that personal one-on-one time with that individual that scared him into honoring a simple religious exemption.
Yeah, it's like and I would use my language carefully, but it's just so crazy. It's like a predatory behavior. Person who displays predatory behavior doesn't want to face their accusers or their victims in the eyes. It's just not something they want to do.
It's like a predator, and I'm talking about the animal. When you have a predator in the wild, they're not going to risk getting injured. Right? As soon as that prey puts up a fight and they don't want to get injured, they back out of that fight really quick. So if you show them, I'm here for the kill, I am here till I die, quote unquote, obviously not advocating for anything like that, but metaphorically, that I'm here to stay. And I told them, I said, if you deny me this, I'm going to unleash hell on this university. I'm going to be here every day. I'm going to be protesting. I'm going to be making a hassle. It's not worth it. Just let me continue my education. Let me do what I've been doing, whatever. I'll do the testing, even though it's completely flawed, unscientific, ridiculous. I'll do it because I have one semester left, man. Like I had one semester and you're going to tell me, well, you can postpone it a year. I said, no, I can't. What do you mean I can postpone it a year? I have a plan. I'm sticking to that plan. I'm not going to just drop my life because you come up with some ridiculous policy because you're getting money from the government. You're
And
corrupt. I'm not listening to this.
no, and education isn't something, it's actually ours, it's yours. It's
Yeah.
education is an individual's right. And it's not something that an organization or administrators can wield freely, take it from you for a year, give it back to you. And you should be grateful for anything we do for you. So I'm really amazed that you just did what you did. That's really impressive. And it's so important for people who are listening too, I think, to do what Nathaniel did in the sense of separating the actual person who's doing, either implementing the policy or on the ground level in any way implementing a policy or enforcing it, to identify them individually. And if that might be ask for their name, try to get them away from the organization that might be protecting them in these acts, because that is really when you're able to put someone responsibility upon someone's shoulders. So that was just a little side note. It's an important aspect, and it's really quite cool. Any other points there, Leah?
Well, do you have a message for young people, for students, and advice on, speaking up? Or you are obviously like very probably inspired by what your father does and take after him quite a bit. But I think there's a lot of young people who are very, very intimidated, even now. I would say less so than maybe a year ago, but even now people are still really scared to just say what they think. I think there's a lot more people on this side, on the side of reason, than we even realize. What message do you have for them?
Well, the media and the politicians make it seem like we're a fringe minority. Like there's not a lot of us, like,
By calling us a fringe minority.
Exactly. That the entire system is against us, that they're the majority, we're the minority, when in reality, we might be the majority of people. I had the privilege of going to the US this summer as well. And the amount of people that are on our side, the amount of people that value freedom is crazy. It's really encouraging. So we're not alone. We're not alone in this. And Canada's a little bit more widespread. We have, we're less condensed. So it might seem like there's not a lot of us, but Ottawa, the truckers should have, if not anything, it should have showed us that we are not alone. There's a lot of us. There's hundreds of thousands of people that think the same way and that value freedom and that want the same thing that we do. So I just want to encourage young people, you're not alone. You're not alone. Find those sources where you can go to, those communities that you can go to that can make you, part of that community, and it'll help you speak out, because it's hard to be the only one to speak out. I know it is not easy to be the only one. Oftentimes I was the only one at the university, and you feel alone. You're getting heckled, you're getting made fun of in videos and all this stuff. That's hard to do. But if you don't bring the truth, then the lie wins, right? You have to be that light in the darkness, or they win. Or this, we're at a very critical point in history. And if you know anything about history, you understand what I'm talking about. If you don't, I encourage you to learn history so that you know what I'm talking about. We're at a very dangerous point in history where if we don't stand up against this, if we don't say no, we're going to be Nazi Germany number 2. We're going to be Soviet Russia number 2. So it's not enough to be a good person anymore. It's not enough to be a good person. You have to be a strong person. You have to be a courageous person. You have to be that person who's going to say, no, I'm not going to listen to these fascists. I'm not going to listen to this agenda. I'm going to say no. The truth is, the people in Nazi Germany, the first victims of the Nazis were actually the German people who are standing up and speaking out. But if all the Jews in Germany, if all the people that value freedom and love humanity would speak out, would say no, and obviously if they wouldn't have let the government confiscate their arms, but if they had said no and spoken out, maybe Nazi Germany wouldn't have happened. Maybe Hitler would have been stopped. It's up to us now to stop this agenda, to stop these politicians. I mean, Trudeau's dictator for life. Trudeau, I don't believe this election was fair. I actually met the guy in the US who has all the data on the Dominion voting machines in the US, who has proof, and he's been raided by the FBI, who has proof that the election was stolen in 2020. Now, I'm not advocating for either candidate because we're in Canada. That doesn't matter. We're Canadian. Let's focus on Canada. But they're cheating elections. Yeah. We have Trudeau now, and it's up to the people, because I don't know if we can replace tyrants with voting. It's possible if enough people go out and vote. But right now, I don't have a lot of faith in Canadians. So it's up to that fringe minority. It's up to those, those persona non gratas of society to speak out and stand out and to push this away. In Alberta right now, we're gathering all the fringe minority types, all the small conservative organizations, and we formed a party. We formed a political movement because movements in general are good, but they have no teeth. They have no ability to change the system unless they become the ruling majority. So we have to get involved in politics. Canadians do not get involved in politics. Canadians barely vote. How are we supposed to change anything if we're not voting, if we're not going out and changing the system? But I also understand why. I mean, the Conservatives are no better than the Liberals, and the Liberals are no better than the NDP. In Alberta, it wasn't the NDP, it wasn't the Liberals that did this to us. It was the so-called conservative government, right? So we're just flipping one psychopath for another psychopath. We're just flipping one tyrant for another tyrant. They're all the same. They're all career politicians that bend to the will of people with money in their pockets. They don't care. They're going to listen to the WEF. They're going to push all this agenda. So we have to form something new. We have to get behind something that's new, that is actually of the people, by the people, for the people. So in Alberta, we formed a party, a government, a provincial party that's looking to replace the current government. And it's called the Alberta Independence Party. My dad was voted in the leader of this party, actually. So he had a revelation in prison when he was in solitary confinement that, if they're not going to leave me alone, if they're not going to let me do my job as a pastor, well, then I'm going to become pastor politician. I'm going to be that loud, annoying voice of opposition in the legislature. So, and he has the support to back it. And we're building this movement of people that we'd otherwise be divided on a million different issues. We all have different ideologies, different ideas, and we're all so divided, but we can agree on the idea of freedom. We can agree on the idea that the system is corrupt. We can agree on the idea that this needs change. We need to change the system where we swap the Conservatives for the Liberals for the NDP, right? Three parties that are essentially pushing on for the same things, and they're not going to change. It's like, what's the definition of insanity? We keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we expect different results. It's not going to change. The people have to change it. These career politicians aren't going to change it. It's up to you and me. So that's what we're doing in Alberta. I also am looking at starting some sort of student movement to go into, I don't know if you're aware of, there's an organization in the US that I had the privilege to be a part of when I was just down there, and it's called Turning Point USA.
Oh, I love Turning Point USA.
Good, I had that in our notes. Yeah, I wanted to hear about that.
Yeah, so I want a Turning Point Canada. I want that, because that is that's a facet where facet's the wrong word. That's an organization that people can back around, right? They can go to that and they can all unite under that one thing and come together and build that community and fight against this. Get involved in politics, get involved in movements, speak out, get their voices.
Here, but we need
exactly.
it.
We have nothing. Yeah. We don't have anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like young people at one point in time before the pandemic, they just weren't interested in politics and learning about politics. But I think this has really changed that. And there's that.
But you know what the thing is? Well, you know what the thing is? Politics is interested in you.
Yeah.
So they're interested in, you should be interested in politics, right? And admittedly, I was not interested in politics. I think they're all, the way they talk even just like makes my blood boil. I just despise everything about it. But the thing is, if we don't get involved and change that, then we're stuck in this mess and we're just going to continue down the road. And we know how this road ends. We know how the story ends because we know history. History can teach us valuable lessons. My dad can teach us valuable lessons. He grew up under a regime. My grandparents grew up under a regime. My great grandparents fought in multiple wars, right? They can tell you all this thing, all these atrocities that were committed. So we have to somehow unite the voice of freedom in these students around Canada. And I want something, and what you guys are doing is great. That's fantastic, because that is uniting students into the right direction. So I want a Turning Point Canada. So that's my side project. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time, but I'm looking at getting something like that started.
Well,
Love it.
that's incredible.
I
That's
love it.
exactly what we need. We'll have to talk to you about that later, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. What an amazing interview. We're going to probably be pinching ourselves from this for a while, me and Lee, but incredible. Nathaniel, thank you so much for coming on. This was just such an amazing discussion, and so appreciative for all our listeners out there. I'm sure I know everyone's going to be just thrilled to hear it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.